New videos every day.
Writing successfully takes practice. If our skills are rusty, it can be easy to convince ourselves that we're not good at it or that it's not worth our time. Maybe we read over what we've written and we see that it doesn't sound quite right, but we're not exactly sure why. So today, I'm going to give you some common mistakes in writing and some tools for how to correct them. Let's begin with the passive voice. Now, this is a very common mistake and it's a very easy trap to fall into, especially if we're not paying attention. So basically, the passive voice versus the active voice is when the subject and the verb are sort of out of whack. They're out of alignment in the sentence. So what happens with the passive voice is that you get a unnecessarily wordy sentence that, again, doesn't sound quite right, and it can be a little tricky to figure out how to fix it. So here's an example of the passive voice. I was hit by the ball. Okay? In order to change that to active voice, which is a much more powerful, much more direct, much more economical approach to making a statement in a sentence. So I was hit by the ball versus the ball hit me. Okay, so the ball is the subject of the sentence, hit is the verb. So in order to take a sentence that is passive voice and turn it into active voice, you're going to put the subject right at the beginning of the sentence and follow it up immediately with the verb, and that's going to correct your problem. 1, 2, 3. Next up, let's talk about tense. Tense basically means when the action in your sentence or your story or your piece of writing is taken place. So the two most common tenses are present tense and past tense. As an example, present tense would be I run or I am running, right? Past tense is I ran, I was running. Okay, so the thing with tense, the most important thing with tense is consistency. Okay, so however you open the piece of writing, if you open in present tense, you're going to want to carry on that present tense throughout all the way to the end. Same thing for past tense. When we shift tenses, mid-story or mid-piece of writing, it can get very confusing for the reader. It can feel jarring. And this is, again, one of those issues that when we're reading over our writing, unless we're sort of hyper aware of the issue, it's easy to pass it by. So if you go through your writing and you just look for the tense issues, have I shifted here? Have I accidentally moved into past when I meant to be in present, and vice versa? You can then go through and smooth the tense throughout the piece and make everything nice and consistent. Now let's talk about perspective, otherwise known as point of view. So basically what perspective is, what it means, it's who's telling the story, right? Whose eyes are we seeing this story or this narrative through? So there's first person, second person, and third person, okay? First person perspective is I did this, I did that. You're telling the story from your own perspective. Second person is you did this, you did that. It's a directive to the reader. It's sort of a command. Now, second person is rarely used, so we're not going to spend as much time talking about it. Third person is he, she, so he said, she said. That can also be, it can have a first person feel, but that's sort of getting into nuances that maybe we don't want to jump into right now. So the most important thing to remember with perspective and point of view, similar to the tense issue, is consistency. So if you open in first person, you're going to want to stay in first person all the way through. If you open in third person, you're going to want to stay in third person all the way through. Again, as with tense, it can be easy to sort of accidentally shift to move in and out. And again, that can be quite confusing for a reader. So just make sure this is something that you'll work on in the process of revision, which I'll talk to you more about in a future video. You'll want to go through and smooth out those perspective issues, those point of view issues. Just FYI, when there is an unexpected shift in point of view, it's called a point of view violation, and again can be quite jarring for the reader. So we're going to want to avoid those. Remember, it's all about consistency. Next on our list of common mistakes is cliché, and this is a biggie. This is a big deal. So it's quite easy when we're writing, because writing is so difficult, to kind of fall back on these clichés, these common expressions, these common turns of phrases. So for example, an example of a cliche, bright as the sun, sweet as candy, like a moth to a flame, right? These phrases, these sentences, they sound familiar, and that's because in speech and in writing, we use them all the time. But think about it. Isn't it so much more interesting to come up with a fresh comparison, right? A fresh simile, a fresh metaphor, something new, a surprising image that your reader is not expecting to come across. There's almost always a better way to say it than to rely on a cliche. There's always a better way, there's always a more interesting way. So the key here is when you find yourself relying on cliche in your writing, and it's a surefire way to bore your reader. So you definitely want to be aware of it and stay away from it. So when you find yourself relying on cliche, just stop for a minute, look at it and say, try to brainstorm. What's a new way to express the same concept? How can I say that in my own words? And your reader will absolutely thank you for it. And the final common mistake that I want to review with you today is economy of language, okay? So there are a few elements to economy of language that you're gonna want to keep in mind. The first is to avoid wordy phrases. So you're gonna wanna ask yourself, why would I say something in 10 words when I could say the exact same thing in 5 words, right? So you're just going to want to find the phrasing or the construction that's going to allow you to communicate your point, articulate your idea, say what you want to say in the least amount of words possible. And that's not to say that we need to completely do away with adjectives or descriptions or details or flowery language. Those are the elements that make a piece of writing quite interesting. But that is to say that you want to be careful that you're not adding in words for the sake of adding in words. You want to make sure that every word in your piece of writing is there for a reason. It's serving a purpose. So that brings me to adjectives, which are also known as modifiers, adjectives, adverbs. So these are basically words that you add into a sentence. They're descriptive words. So adjectives and adverbs are great. They're very helpful. Again, details and description is what really makes a piece of writing come to life. But in the same way, you don't want to use them just to use them. You want to use them when they're important. So maybe you want to say the camera, the black camera focused. The question to ask yourself is the fact that the camera is black actually important? Does that detail need to be there? Do I need that adjective? Is it serving my story in any way? Is it serving my piece of writing? If the answer to any of these questions is no, you can go ahead and do away with that adjective. Finally, the last point within economy of language is, again, the passive voice, active voice issue. One thing that passive voice does, and again, that is something like, I was hit by the ball versus the ball hit me, it adds extra words to your sentence. It adds additional unnecessary words. So if you make sure that you're always sticking with the active voice, you'll be good to go. In a future video, I'll be reviewing some common grammatical errors and grammatical mistakes that often appear in writing and giving you some tips on how to go about fixing them. In a future video, I'm going to give you some options for word games and other fun pastimes that you can play and do instead of spending your full day and night in front of the computer. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. Again, I'm Justine Tal Goldberg with Write by Night. If you'd like to learn more about me or what I do, please visit my website at www.writebynight.net. And remember, like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel.